Well, it's really hard to see how in this conflict that you're referring to and in the other conflict that it's serving the good, but I guess it always is. In every dark cloud there is always a silver lining. We're being exposed to a horrific exposition of violence and abuse and terrorism in the theatre and the current theatre in the Middle East. Unbelievable. I mean, it's the first time, I guess, that a war has ever been kind of reported onto Instagram, streamlined onto your phone. And so it's to me, we need to be cognizant not just of the war itself, but upon the impact that's having upon the general populace, that is the global family. And much as with 9/11, I see many parallels between what's happening here and with 9/11. Now, I know a lot of people thought that was still the bunch of these crazy Arabs who kind of like instigated this thing with 9/11, but there's solid evidence being provided on many, many different platforms that in fact it was not just a bunch of Arabs, that it was in fact being orchestrated very consciously by a group of individuals who have power and the geopolitical domination as their desired goals and agenda. So one has to look a little bit beyond what is happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's having an enormous effect upon the psyche of people in general. And I think it's designed to do so. Just as with 9/11, it was designed to create a kind of a trauma in the collective consciousness of people. And in fact, it was a trauma. It was a trauma that went very, very deep into the psyche of the collective and had its ramifications that played out, you know, for years afterwards. For example, after that, we had security in the airports. Before that, I was flying everywhere. Never had security. There was never incidents like that. But now, they said, no, we're just doing this because of terrorism. That's why we've been treated. It'll be released later on when we're over the terrorism. Has it been released? No. It has been the excuse for more control, more power over the individual rights and freedoms taken away for the common good, of course. Always for the common good. Yeah. So the agenda goes. But the effect of that trauma has been universal and deep. I don't know if you're familiar with MK Ultra, which is a form of mind control developed by the CIA, taken over from where the Nazis left off in the Second World War. Because, you know, you've got to remember with Operation Paperclip, they took the best of the Nazi minds, the Americans. It was divided between the Americans and the Russians, and taken over, and they were absolved of any kind of wrongdoing as long as they worked for the US government. And therefore you had Werner von Braun, who was one of Hitler's main rocket scientists, starting up NASA. He headed NASA. Some of the other appropriations from Germany, Nazi Germany, started the CIA and various other intelligence organizations, and or at least with a basis, an advisory board within that. I don't want to go too deep into that, but all I'm trying to say is that these people who are with that trauma, the MK Ultra, which was developed by the CIA, started by the Nazis, involves traumatizing people in order to get people to agree to things that they would normally never agree to. And so by the trauma acts as a profound terrorizing catalyst to provoke people or to influence people to go into areas of behavior that they probably would not normally do. And I think that the whole COVID scam was also part of that. You know, getting people to be locked down. It was basically social engineering as far as I could see, where people were saying, it's like just training a dog, really, not much different. Get into your kennel, stay. All right, you can come out now, good dog. Back in your kennel, it's for your own good. Come here, good dog. And that's how they this is how they condition people. Now I see this whole thing in Gaza as being yet another horrible, terrifying stroke in the conditioning of human consciousness. And I believe ultimately it is to accept a one-world government. I think that that certain geopolitical moves are being made right now and are being provoked in order to have people agree to a one-world government. I'm not saying a one-world government is wrong. I think eventually we have to grow to a global awareness of ourselves as brothers and sisters, as citizens of planet Earth, and get rid of these imaginary lines on a map. I'm all for it, but not in the way that, say, the World Economic Forum is espousing, where a bunch of billionaires get to decide who and how and what people will, where they will live, how they'll behave, what the rules are, and so on and so forth. So do you think people would normally give up their nationalist heritage just to say, oh yeah, form a one world government, give up your currency, give up your culture, give up your, your folk traditions and so on and so forth? No. But if you provoke enough chaos and enough horror and enough terror on the planet where people are literally terrified and in fear, then people not only agree, but they'll be begging for it. Somebody please do something. This is terrible. Somebody. Well, we have got an option. Here we go. It's the classic thing that David Icke always says about create the problem and present the solution. And this is really what I see going on a larger level. And it's being done at the murderous waste of the most horrific, shedding of souls that we've seen in modern history. And it's being done, justified as being fighting terrorism, which is a very strange concept. I mean, hello? Bombing thousands of people is not terrorism, children, women. I mean, it's a very clever psyop, a psychological operation where people will agree that it's all done in self-defense, but it's if you look at the larger picture, and I'm not siding with the Israelis or the Palestinians. I don't see it's an either or, be on our side or the other side or whatever. This is falling parcel of the trap. The trap is to make a side. And I just want to call out terror where I see it. I just want to call out evil where I see it. And if you look at the word evil, it's live backwards. So I call evil something that is anti-life, anti-human beings, anti-respect and dignity for human beings. And I've just finished reading a book, I finished a while ago, by a guy called Paul Levy called Dispelling Wetiko. And Wetiko is a Native American term to describe the shadow that we all carry. Each of us has a bit of the Wetiko. It's the shadow, that unconscious aspect of ourselves that is highly contagious if it's being projected outwards. We saw it happening in Nazi Germany. We saw it happening under Stalin. We saw it happening under Mao. We see it happening today all over the planet, under the Israelis, under the Chinese, under the Russians, Americans, you name it. It's all being infected by what they call this mind virus called Wetiko, which is a projection of shadow, saying, there's the terrorist, when all one really has to do is go, who's the terrorist? What, you're bombing young children as a way of stopping terrorism? Since when has that ever happened? Since when has hate ever dispelled hate? Only love can dispel hate. So when people act under the guise of their own projected shadow, i.e. they're infected by this mind virus, and it can happen on a collective level as well as an individual level, called Wetiko, this is what I would like to expose. I'm not for or against any political faction. I don't even want to go into the machinations of who is right or wrong, because that's simply playing into the trap, into the game of pointing the finger and again projecting the shadow outwards. I'm more about people owning their own shadow, owning inside of themselves their own darkness and becoming aware of that, and then healing that within themselves, because in so doing, we inadvertently heal the planet. Tinkering with the nuts and bolts of the social system and the political system can only go so far. True healing and true collective healing comes from cleaning up your own backyard. And becoming and seeing how that killer also is inside oneself. That terrorist is also inside oneself. And one has to deal with that. And the way to deal with that is to acknowledge it, is to expose it.
Is that where the plants come in?
Oh, look, the plants, of course, can be a great aid, but this is for anybody who looks deeply inside their own soul. You don't need to take the plants in order to come to these conclusions. One just needs to look deeply inside one's own soul and look deeply into the state of the human condition to arrive at these conclusions. And so my interest is simply to expose that mind virus, that evil that can justify its own actions through some excuse or some victim behavior, and then perpetrate the most horrific, occurrences under that name of fighting terrorism.
So is that the main thing that people can do? Like, I'm just trying to think for people who are feeling helpless, what is it that they can do to
stop acquiescing, stop buying the lie, stop watching the news. The news is of mind control par excellence. We are being daily conditioned. Take this side, take that side. Look, there's the bad guys, we're the good guys. All of this childish, puerile kind of thought process that's going on in our mainstream media. I would say the first thing anybody and everybody should do, and that you have the power to do, is stop watching that bullshit. Because it's a virus in itself. It is a tool of mass hypnosis. And just because you know it's a tool of mass hypnosis doesn't mean you're invulnerable to it. So I had to stop watching it because I could feel it affecting me. And that's one thing they can do. The second thing they can do is stop giving power away. Question authority. Question your politicians. Question your doctors, especially the ones who are promoting a global health agenda. These are potentially great tools of oppression, and many, many great thinkers have pointed out this throughout history. Watch the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower warned against it. Kennedy warned against it. Other people have warned against the medical tyranny that is spreading like a contagion on our planet today, because there are the same people who are making these bold moves in order to create a one-world government are coming at it from many different angles. Certainly in the industrial military complex, certainly in the health agenda, the political arena, the sociological arena, with the introduction of AI and the way they're making programming AI to support that, in so many different ways that there's too many to mention. Then they all look unrelated, all these little elements, but in fact, they're all pushing for the one thing. And so I believe that the whole Gaza thing is meant to horrify and shock primarily. It's meant to create trauma in the collective consciousness, and such an outrage that it will then, people will either take sides and then support the extrapolation of that into a world war. And world wars are notoriously the way that the powers that be shift the furniture in the room. They change the geopolitical power setup, and they'll use war as a way of redistribution of wealth, riches, ownership, and power. And so I believe that that's what is really behind this. People want to create as much, these people who I call the puppeteers, the ones who are holding the puppets of the political, sociological, religious movement, are planetary wide. And it's not, anyway, let's not go there. Let's not go into who they are or what they are.
Well,
most people with their own research can do that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that these moves are designed to create maximum horror, discomfort, and terror. Not just in the hearts and minds of the children and the people who are being bombed indiscriminately every day. Not just in the minds of the Israelis who feel that they've been completely, terrorized by Hamas, but in the minds and hearts of people in the planet. You could go into why that Israel-Hamas thing is and where did it start and what was its source, but that's not my agenda. My thing is to point out that it is a trauma-inducing event that has a very nefarious goal, and it is to shock people, much as we were with 9/11, where it becomes almost an obsession and people cannot think straight. People go into what might be called an altered state, like a disowned platform or alter, much as people show in individuals that have multiple personality disorder. Many people who suffer immense abuse, part of their spirit leaves their body while that abuse is happening, and their consciousness is not fully intact in terms of their full integrity. And then later it comes back, but that part then becomes dispossessed out of the reaches of ordinary consciousness. Now, what I'm saying is there's an element of that there collectively, what's going on. So that people get traumatized, they can't think with full awareness or full rational minds. People become very subject to what might be called herd consciousness, or the proliferation of Watiko.
So what can people do about that when they're feeling that trauma? What can they actually do?
We've only got ourselves to work with. When, even through politics, through doing the vote, and we all know that, the votes are rigged, mostly. Politicians are compromised, corrupt, receiving bribes. So even though people go through the motion of so-called democracy by voting, many people realize that it's a rigged game and that it's a pointless exercise, but still people go through the motions because they think, well, what else have I got? But the thing is, we have everything else. Because by supporting these priests, politicians / puppeteers, we are actually disempowering ourselves by giving our power away to people who don't necessarily have our best interests at heart. Their interest is more with power, with money, with global dominance, with all kinds of other issues, rather than just the benefit or the dignity or the well-being of humanity. And unfortunately, we're living in very dark times. These are very dangerous times. We stand on the brink of an enormous eruption of if you want to call it that, evil on this planet. And I call it simply the Watiko virus, the mind virus, which is infecting a lot of people. And if you want to find out more about that, look into the work of Paul Levy. And he's done an immense amount of work and really brilliant work. He's written now about 3 books on the Watiko phenomenon. And I highly recommend, if people want to know more about this, then read that. But once you realize that Watiko only works when it operates in the dark, it only operates in unconsciousness. So by bringing the light, we can expose the Watiko, and the Watiko falls down like a house of cards. The Watiko, it only operates within those areas of ourselves that we think, that's not us, that's that person over there. And so we're projecting outwards. So the Watiko, the good thing about the Watiko is that it has within it its own antidote, its own element for its own demise. And that is by exposing Watiko, we wake up. In seeing the illusion of Watiko, in seeing the horror of terror, fighting terror and being projected as more terror, we see the beast, the demon, the diabolical intent of that entity we call Watiko. And by seeing it, it's as if the glass darkly breaks. It's like the veils are lifted to a great degree. Once you truly see what's happening, you are no longer under the influence of it. And when you are no longer under the influence of it, you have dominion over your own being. What does that mean? That translates as sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean? The right to say yes and no. The right to say, I agree to this or I do not agree to this. Most people are unwittingly agreeing to the propagation of the unconscious Watiko, that is the horror and the violence and the terror in the world, out of fear, out of being bullied, out of being insecurity, out of being terrorized. And so people will acquiesce, will go along with, will agree to, subtly, things that they don't really hold to be true. I know people with the vaccinations, for example, who took the vaccination now regret it because they went along with it because their job, or they wanted to travel, or they just didn't want to stick their head up and be counted as a non-vaxxer. And so you surreptitiously and inadvertently agree, which means you give away your power. Now, if that stopped, if people actually gained dominion over themselves, in other words, just took control of themselves, in other words, growing up, stop looking to mummy and daddy to give you all the answers about how to live life, and here's the rule book, and this is what you do and can't do, and this is the punishment if you don't do it, and blah, 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 blah. It's called conditioning. Conditioning means conditioning someone to evoke a certain response, to agree to a certain thing, all of that. So by unplugging, disengaging from this behemoth of conditioning that says that we should behave like this or that, we gain dominion over ourselves. And all that means, it doesn't mean you have to fight the system, it doesn't mean you have to argue or get upset or frustrated or beat whatever you think it is the enemy is. I mean, a certain amount of that is healthy, Because in the first instance of saying no, you've got to be like a lion, say, no, I do not agree. I do not consent. But once you've passed the angry stage, you come to a place of absolute confidence in your own being, where you become your own authority, and you align with other beings who are vibrating on that frequency. So this is a war of frequencies. We're being invited or seduced into the shadow emanations of the lower chakras with all this war in Gaza, the terror, the horror, the abuse, everything we witness. If you go into that, you start to feel those things. You start to be enveloped, and you start to be taken over and overwhelmed by those lower vibrational energies. Even if it's just to say, this is horrible, make it stop, I disagree. But still, if you're in it, you're in it. You're either in this frequency or that. So one has to realize this is a karma drama. It's an awful seduction into being thrown off balance of your own sovereignty. And to claim sovereignty, you have to just come back to yourself. Now, I don't care how you do that. You can go for a walk in nature. You can swim. You can connect with others who feel on the same vibration. But what one must do is to simply stop giving power away to those who purport to be in control. And by doing that, you start to gain some sort of element of yourself. You start to work on research. You start to liberate yourself. That's all we can do. We can liberate ourselves. We can't tinker with the nuts and bolts out there, and we can't influence, because we don't have millions and billions of dollars, what's happening on the material plane, but we can transform our own consciousness. And how people do that is entirely up to them. You can connect with other groups, but you must make an effort to do it. Because if you just stay with what you are, you slide into the agenda, which means you acquiesce. And therefore, you do not attain sovereignty, and you have to be at the behest of whatever is given to you as your dog food at the end of the day.
So that could look something like dealing with like you said, the shadow or the Watiko within yourself, and making some conscious choices about, choosing love over the fear, or, do you think that's
well, of course, Dean, but, it sounds very kind of like, kind of idealistic, choose love over fear. Of course, we must exercise that. We are facing every moment, am I choosing love? Am I choosing fear? But how do we do that in practical terms? Well, I find in myself, the way I do it myself, is every moment of my day I'm checking myself. And, often the mind will think I'm doing something out of love, when actually I'm doing it out of fear. And, the mind is a very tricky customer. It's not called the monkey mind for nothing. And so one has to go to a better barometer, a more trustworthy kind of measure of what is really going on the unconscious levels of my consciousness. And for that, I watch my body. If somebody says to you, "How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm good, thanks." Obviously, the body language is telling you that it's not true. It's a lie. They're not feeling good, but they're saying they're feeling good. And the person maybe even believes that they're feeling good when they're actually not. The body is contracted. And when you're feeling good, and when something is really resonating deeply with your soul, and you're with brothers and sisters who are really in a vibrant state, your body language is open. Your body's saying, yes, I'm choosing love in this moment. That's an obvious way, but it can be cut down to very small minutiae, but it requires a lot of awareness. It requires presence. It requires a certain amount of self-inquiry. Now, I know these are words that perhaps seem to be related to discipline, and in a certain sense it is. We have to use discipline to regain mastery over ourselves. After all, that's the only thing we can master, is our own being. And our own being is made up of multiple layers. And as far as our consciousness is concerned, the layer that is the conscious is only really about 20%. The rest of it, 80%, is largely unconscious. So we can't trust the mind. We can work with the mind, knowing what the characteristics and the nature of mind is, but you can trust the body. The body is a far more innocent barometer of how you're truly feeling, because it doesn't lie. It's telling you the truth, even if you're thinking something opposite to the truth. So gaining mastery over oneself means becoming aware of all our responses and seeing how much we give away rote responses just because we're afraid, or rote responses just because we're conditioned or hypnotized, what's called the race hypnosis. We need to retract our consciousness from just willy-nilly giving it over to other people who we think are authorities. Not to say that certain authorities don't have functions, they do, but only after our worthy estimation of whether they're worthy of that authority or not, for us giving it to them. Not just willy-nilly. And so it means holding a certain dominion over oneself, holding your own energy and really considering something, say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not subscribing to that. I don't buy it. I don't want it. It's not what I want, therefore, no. And being clear. And that's what every person, human being can do, but it requires a certain amount of self-introspection. It requires a certain amount of self-evaluation. It requires a high level of personal honesty. But these are qualities that we are just beginning to cultivate as a human species en masse. But this is part of our growth. This is certainly the bottleneck we're being pushed into in our evolutionary push, is we're coming to that point where every person is being forced one way or the other to really consider these questions. You know, what is real, really? What is unreal? Is what we're fed on the news real? Especially the advent of AI, and you can fake up anything now. How do we know? I love Byron Katie. She says, how do you know it's real? Can you prove that it's real? Is it just that you're assuming that it's real? How about coming back to very basic things, like how am I feeling in this moment? If I feel like shit, what can I do to love myself up, to make myself feel good, to make myself feel in a high frequency in the heart? That doesn't mean you lose compassion for all those people who are suffering on the planet, who are going through nightmares on this planet. Of course, that keeping an open heart doesn't just mean feeling good and feeling fluffy and feeling high vibrational. It means feeling the rawness of life. It means feeling the hurting of life, where people are suffering and pain. One has empathy, and that deep empathy is called compassion, because it's an acknowledgement of pain and realizing at the same time that that is what is, and it is all leading towards an opening and a transformation that will, in its wake, leave this darkness, this time of great purification, almost as a kind of a footnote in history. Just as in a birth, when the mother goes through intense pain and the peristalsis has begun and the child is inexorably being pushed towards this impossibly tiny cervix, it thinks it's dying. You know, the mother is going through an incredible, arduous passage, a rite of passage, in which sometimes mother and child die, so it's dangerous. But with the advent of the birth and with the birthing of the individual, do you think the mother remembers the pain that happened before? Yes, as a memory, but presented with the joy, the miracle of the birth, it far, far transcends the experience of the purification of the pain that we had to go through in order to get to the light. And I believe that we're in this little bottleneck now where we're in the time of great purification, and all these dense energies are presenting themselves to the global consciousness in order to be transcended and transformed and then transcended. It's not a blame game. Like, they're the wrong. Look at these people. Look at the Israelis. Look at the Palestinians, Hamas. That's buying into the whole story. It's realizing this is a disease. Human beings are in the grip of a lethal and potentially fatal disease. And certainly if it develops into another Third World War, it can be like suicide, really. Because we've got more bombs than this planet can sustain, you know, if they all get shot at the same time. But of course, I don't think it'll come to that. Because even these people who control these levers and these buttons of power also will come to that point where perhaps they will transform. Or inevitably, I believe that because we're also going through a cosmic shift, it's not just in the human domain, the opportunities for transformation will become more and more and more. And the opportunities to expose the Wetiko, this evil mind virus, it's like a vampire that sucks on the life force of humanity, will also be exposed. And when it is fully exposed, because it was an illusion to begin with, only fed by our own unconsciousness, it also will lose its grip because it was made of nothing. It was just a condition, a hypnosis, a veil, a phantom, a jinn. It was a phantom. And so, like, as we move towards this time of great revelation, it is revealing that which is unconscious, and it just needs the light of consciousness to accept that and bring it home, like the prodigal son in the Bible. No longer banished, come home. and bring home all of those parts of ourselves that we thought were only existing out there, and to bring them home and to become whole. I think that's our purpose as human beings. It's not to become perfect or find a perfect utopian society. It's simply to become whole. That means being balanced, restoring our own integrity, our own sense of alignment, bringing the light and the dark together. And at the moment, we are seeing the polarization of the light and the dark on this planet as we've never seen it before. But these are essential ingredients within the alchemical crucible, and therefore, one can't judge it. Diamonds only come from immense pressure upon carbon. Years of cold, heat, pressure, time. And it's the same with consciousness. It requires immense forces of light and dark and all of the hypnosis that we've been subjected to in order to create the conditions in which we wake up and transcend and take a quantum leap beyond into wholeness, into an expanded sense of consciousness, and into a new paradigm for a new earth to come to exist on completely new parameters than the ones that we've been working with for the last couple of millennia.
So are you saying that what's going on in Gaza, and I guess all around the world, but mainly in Gaza at the moment, is a part of our humanity's evolutionary process, and what's to come in the next few years?
Well, everything is a part of our evolutionary process. One goes through a rite of passage to move from one level of consciousness to another, as in all of the great initiation rites, all of the great mystery schools would present basically that formula. One has to have death and rebirth at the very heart of any transformation. A part of us dies and a new part is born. As in a young boy at puberty being taken by the men and brought into a conscious holder of adulthood within the tribe. And that can be extrapolated into all kinds of, like the mystery schools, etc. But I think that, as we move through this, it's all part of the evolution. It is. How can it not be? Albeit a very distasteful and horrific passage that we're making right now. It's as if we're in a hall of mirrors, when you're in those funny mirror, and all we're seeing are distorted reflections. So it behooves us not to respond to any of those distorted. Why would we respond to a distorted reflection? But people are so busy responding or reacting, let's say, to those distorted reflections and getting themselves more tightly and more tightly into the vicissitudes of what the Eastern people call karma. And that's like a Chinese burn. It just goes deeper and deeper until you learn to let go, to wake up from the dream, to wake up from the illusion. And the illusion is the mindset that we've been sold. The illusion is our personal conditioning. And all of the great masters in the Eastern world said one needs to transcend ego in order to find true self. Well, in a sense, if you look at ego as the kind of like the collective ego as being the race hypnosis, the shared consensus reality that we all agree is reality. It's just an agreement, nothing else in substance or reality. To let that go and to then reacquaint ourselves and reconnect with that which has always been there, but it was just unrecognized, undiscovered, because we were so entranced by what was being presented to us from the outside. So this is it's a very, very important step that we're going through, albeit a very challenging, horrific, nightmarish passage through the dark. And this is the part of the process that's called death. And rebirth will come. It will come. And so this is where a lot of people give way to despair and hopelessness. And often many people are taking their lives now. Suicide is just going through the roof. I mean, it's always been high in places like Gaza because they've been under these kind of conditions very overtly for, I don't know how long, 60 years, however long they've been under the oppression of being in a kind of concentration camp, And so, I know a lot of people will take issue with what I say and how I present it, but I have to reiterate again, I'm not into taking sides. I happen to have grown up with both Israelis and Arabs as my best friends. When I was younger, I was surrounded by Lebanese. And I was recently in Lebanon, 2 years ago, doing a concert. And I love those people. And some of my best friends are Israelis. In fact, most of my best friends are Israelis. And yet I've been to Israel, and I've seen what happens there, and beautiful people. But the mindset that is being engendered by the political masters of those countries is such that it's this enmity that seems endless. And I think it's designed to be like that. How many times have presidents and leaders tried to find a two-state solution and find a Palestinian solution? I mean, it goes on and on and on, way back since Israel has been created. It's designed that way. That's the way I see it, because it keeps traumatizing people, and it is a source of conflict. Is always a source where people can be manipulated and influenced deeply. And so I don't think there ever was an intention to find a solution. I think what we're seeing now is the extrapolation of that lack of intent in the qualities of what we're witnessing, in the horror and the terror of what we're witnessing daily in this so-called Gaza war. It's unbelievable. It's the worst aspects of human nature running riot, having a field day in its full unholy glory in the so-called Holy Land. And it really, really affects me. I'm deeply passionate about human beings. I'm not passionate about politics. I never have been. I'm not for taking sides. But wherever I see human abuse, terror, manipulation, domination, I will call it out. I don't care where it is, who it is, what it's by. It doesn't matter to me, you know. And because I've had friends on both sides of the Israeli and the Lebanon, well, in this case Lebanon, but other Arabic people as well, I can see it's an old family feud that goes way back to Abraham, you know. Abraham, I don't know if you know the story, had a wife called Sarah, and she couldn't give children. And later on, she was getting older. He said, "Do you mind if I lie with Hagar, who was, I think, the hired help in the house, so that I can have a son?" And she reluctantly agreed. And then Hagar had a son called Ishmael. And then Ishmael grew up, and then, against all odds, Sarah got pregnant later in life. And she had a son called Isaac. And then she said to Muhammad, "This is your true son, Isaac. That's not. You must kill them both." And Abraham didn't have the heart to do that, so he took them to the edge of the desert and said, "Go, never look back. Go, leave. You can't come here again." And from Isaac came the 12 tribes of Israel, and from Ishmael, of course, came the Arabic people. So they eat the same food, they all worship one God, they're both Sephardic. That's why this funny thing about anti-Semitism is always wears a bit hollow to me, because Arabs are Semites too. As well as Israelis, as well as the Sephardic strain. A lot of Israelis are actually Europeans. So the thing is that it's an old family feud. And as you probably know, as most people know, family feuds go the deepest and the hardest and are the most bitter and the most miserable of all feuds, if you get caught up in one. So I see that there is a solution, and the only solution is forgiveness. And that's so far off the table right now as not to even be considered. There's the thing about the perpetrator and the victim. If you don't heal yourself as a victim, one day you will become the perpetrator. Just as the Israelis were persecuted in the Second World War, they are now the persecutors of a group of people who were much like the Jews in the Second World War under Nazi Hitler. That's because that cycle of victim and perpetrator has been unbroken. Forgiveness is the only thing that can cut through that. And as I say, something really, really full on, some big Zen stick probably has to happen before that is even considered. Sadly, it could be all healed if people would actually do that. And I know elements within both the Arabic and the Jewish contingents who are very much fighting for that position, who are looking for reconciliation, who look because they're brothers and sisters, right? And just looking for appeasement, not even appeasement, healing, true, real healing, which means an acknowledgement of all the abuse that's happened. But that is far from the table under the present Israeli government, which has been shown again and again to be a corrupt government. So therefore, Watika rules the day, both with Hamas and with the Israeli responses. It's just Watika in its full raging glory for all the world to see.
So is that representative in the Zionist movement, where they sort of claim to be God's chosen people? And into?
There is a big history of the Zionist thing, and I don't really want to go into that because it's a political one. I'm happy to talk about consciousness, but I think that the Zionist agenda has been there well before the Second World War. It was started in the 19th century. Anyone who wants to can do their research and find where that all began and how that began and what their ultimate aims are. But what I can say is that the people, the ruling financial elites, and the people who carry most of the power and influence on the planet are all Zionists. And openly so. They'll all say we're Zionists. And it's not just relegated to Jewish people. Many Jewish people are not Zionists. In fact, many Jewish people denounce Zionism. I've seen a lot of Jewish people online and with my friends who've absolutely taken that position. So Zionism seems to be equated with the Jewish religion, but it's not. It is a political agenda that was set up by a number of Jewish individuals. But as I say, I do believe that these people carry an inordinate amount of power and influence over what happens on the planet.
So would you say that they are part of the cabal, if we want to label the cabal, and see them involved with weapons and...
Well, some people call it the cabal, some people call it the deep state, some people call it the elite. I'm not sure what you're referring to exactly there, but I assume that it's the vassals of power, the puppeteers, what I call the puppeteers, the programmers, that's what I call them. Sure, yes. These people are, I believe, ultimately at the center of the web.
So what people?
The cabal or the deep state, or the people who control the levers of power, money, and influence upon the planet. If you want to find out who they are, you can do your own research. I mean, a lot of people mention them all the time.
And do you think they're behind this war as well?
I don't know. Who knows? But the thing is, I think it's highly likely that this is a very staged event. I mean, I think it was 2 weeks, anyone can look this up, before the Hamas attack upon Israel, that Netanyahu was addressing the General Assembly in the United Nations, and he was talking about the new Middle East. And the new Middle East showed Israel without Gaza, without the West Bank, without anything. It was just that was the new Middle East. And then later on I found out that they're designing a waterway, a canal like the Suez Canal, but a better and improved version to go right through where Gaza was. So do your own math, draw your own conclusions. And one other final thing I want to say about that: do you really think? I find it very hard to believe that the most sophisticated army in the world and the most powerful intelligence, organizations in the world were not able to detect a bunch of people coming in with tractors and hang gliders, bombing up fences, coming in and then wreaking their havoc as they did. Hello. I've seen interviews with Israeli intelligence people who said, that's impossible. Not even a cockroach can walk past there without them knowing. So to me, we live in a very, very dangerous time. This is a time when psyops and staged false flags are the order of the day. It's the culinary dish that everyone's being served and expected to believe. What's more, you're expected to believe that, which is an insult to anyone's intelligence if they really look deeply. And without blame of one side or the other. You just see the facts of what happened. So I mean, like, for 7 hours for the Israeli IDF not to be aware that this was happening, first off, and secondly, not to respond, I find that very, very difficult to believe. And when you look at someone like Netanyahu, who was virtually on the political dung heap before this happened. Netanyahu. He was up for corruption crimes, all kinds of things. There was the judiciary issue in Israel, in which he had hundreds of thousands of people in the streets demonstrating against him. Suddenly, he's king of the castle again because he's got a war. He's got a war, and of course the nation rallies behind the leader in wartime. And of course, he can't be questioned. Like, how did that happen? That all these people got in and the IDF didn't know. That can't happen during a war. That only happens after a war. So the motivation for Netanyahu to close the war is zilch. because then these big questions will have to be answered. Rather, I see that it would be in their plan to extend and extrapolate the war so that that becomes almost, you forget about it because of the larger impact. If Iran was to be brought into the war, if China was to be brought in, if Russia was to be, or North Korea, it'd be a nightmare in which this little episode would be promptly forgotten. I think that's the plan, is just to drown it out with even more terror, even more horror. And I wish I was wrong. I wish what I see was not what I see, but I do see it. And I don't see it with any blame or judgment. I just see, well, we're going really deep into the shit now, because that's where we need to go. The world needs to have a huge purge. The First and Second World War was simply to shift the geopolitical power group and the money power group on the planet. They're hoping to do the same with this one. But I believe that this one, people are more and more are waking up. See, the danger is, and this is where Watiko carries its own element of its own demise, is the higher the monkey climbs, the more he shows his ass. And the more this happens, the more people will see, fuck, that's bullshit, this is. And people will be forced to wake up, whether they like it or not. And when people see the truth of the level and extent of the nefarious manipulation that's been going on our planet, they will, the whole house of cards will fall down. Because it's only sustained by the implicit and complicit agreement of the general populace on the planet today. Otherwise, it can't happen. So if people say no, if people refuse to acquiesce, if people just say, I do not agree, I do not consent to this, then on every level, in other words, you've got to check yourself. Is this true? Is this not true? One needs to take more responsibility. If we are to have more freedom as a species, one needs to cultivate more responsibility, self-responsibility, because freedom and responsibility are two wings of the same bird. You can't have one without the other. Many people want freedom without taking the responsibility, what that entails to become a conscious custodian of this incredibly beautiful planet, which is being raped and debased and abused by the consciousness that is in power on the planet today. So, but we have to pass through this dark night of the soul. It's a long, very dark night of the soul.
So, where do you think humanity is heading in the next few years?
Well, you know, for me, I've always seen it, that it's heading towards a rebirth. I believe that it's going to get worse before it gets better. This is going to intensify. I think we thought 2023 or the other years that preceded were tough. Believe me, just hang on to your seat, because 2024 is going to show us some really powerful events, powerful surprises for many people. And they won't be very nice surprises, to say the least. And I think that we need to go deeper into the dark, because so many people are still asleep. And so by going deeper and deeper into the dark, whilst more and more people are waking up and exposing the Watiko for what it is, it will start to gather momentum. And just as fear and the Watiko is a virus, so is love. Love, connection, sovereignty, true connection with another human being or human beings. This is what's being inspired and awoken in many, many people, a significant percentage of people on the planet today. And that doesn't go without saying. That's certainly never reported on the news. That's what I see when I travel around the world. I only see people waking up. So it gives me hope. And what we're being fed through every possible portal and transmission through so many different avenues, through the media, etc., is horror, doom, gloom, despair, fear. You know, all of these things are just being shoved down people's throats. And of course, many people, being very suggestible and impressionable, buy this. But more and more people are starting to question, where is this coming from? On whose authority? On what domain of truth is this being presented? And people have never questioned that before. They've always just assumed that governments and politicians and priests have their best interests in heart. And it's that very assumption that has allowed these people to manipulate and exploit human consciousness to the degree that they have. It's that very assumption. So that's why I say, it sounds kind of trite to say, stop acquiescing, but the moment you Stop making that assumption. The moment you begin to question authority, in a good way, not like in a rebellious fuck you sort of way, but in a way of going, where are you coming from? Who are you? And what's your agenda? Just questioning. And then you can go, yeah, that's great. Or you can go, no, sorry, not buying that. In other words, retaining your own sovereignty. This is what these people are gravely and grievously afraid of, is the liberation of human consciousness. And this is the very answer, the wild card in the deck. It's the joker in the deck, the very thing that can wake people up. But it requires a lot of responsibility. It requires the willingness to share yourself on levels of truth with all human beings that you come into contact with. And it requires a level of discrimination to reject that which is anti-human, anti-life, anti-abundance, anti-sovereignty, anti-freedom. And if you look clearly, you can always make that distinction. If you're under the influence of the hypnosis, of course, you just assume that this is for our own good. It's for the good of all. It's for the benefit of everyone. So I must do this horrible thing, whatever it is, in order to benefit everybody. Look at it this way. Existence has never asked anybody to do an injustice to another person in order to benefit the rest. Never. It's a misnomer right from the word go. It's a narcissistic fascist thought, a Machiavellian approach, which where the means justifies the end. No, existence is not like that. Existence is nested in love, and it's always been nested in love. And I'm not talking about the infatuation you feel for another human being, or your dog or your cat, or your mum or your dad. I'm talking about that coherence, that non-dual coherence, that shared collective consciousness that we have, that is always there. It's always been there, but it's just been covered over and smeared over by this illusion of this hypnotic illusion through what we've been told and what we've indiscriminately chosen to believe. And this is at the heart of the matter of everything we see. And that's why tinkering with the nuts and bolts of this or that, oh, that's good, they're right, they're wrong, is not going to do very much, ultimately. But seeing the illusion, seeing the mind virus, exposing the evil, which is anti-life, wherever it shows up, is a very good step forward, is a very good beginning. And in these uncertain times, what I would say for people is that there's no antidote, no formula to make things okay or to make things clear. Unclarity is the order of the day. So I would say, get used to not knowing. Become comfortable with not knowing. I call it the wisdom of insecurity, of just making a confident step forward, keeping the light of the heart and empathy and communion with others well open in your heart. And then just take the next step. And then just take the next step without necessarily needing to know where it's going to go. Because we're in the dark, dark tunnel right now. We're in the vaginal canal. Peristalsis has begun. We're being moved by forces and beyond our behest and control. So we must just go with it and trust. Trust being the operative word. Trust that existence has done this before. It's done it 1,000 times, and that we need to trust our mother. We need to trust our father. By that I just mean, trust ourselves, really, because we are one with the mother, one with the father. And it's time for us to grow up and assume that authority and take it on as a healthy evolution of our species, to then be able to make these steps confidently, with love, with an open heart, even when things are falling apart. Keep an open heart. Try not to blame. Try not to judge, because that will place you firmly within the vicissitude of duality, of this or that, up and down, in and out, right and wrong, good and evil. And I use the word evil only as anti-life. As I say, it's live backwards. But I don't think it's a thing out there. And I don't think there's a thing called good out there. We dissect the world into polarity. But we can also bridge the polarity gap and bring it back into oneness by realizing that all things are connected. Like Chief Seattle said, all things are connected. When a butterfly bats its wings here, it's felt on the other side of the universe. Everything is connected by a non-local quantum field in which we exist. And that non-local quantum field I call love. And that is what is our true nature. That is where we're really nested within. And the illusion, the shroud of the illusion, we have to consciously lift up. And if we don't consciously lift it up, existence will do it for us. But it'll do it in a much more, let's say, dramatic way. Like it'll be a Zen stick. It doesn't have to be. You can just wake up from the dream. But whether people wake up consciously or whether they wake up kicking and screaming is really a personal choice. And I believe that what will happen in the next few years is an intensification of what we're experiencing right now. But that will be followed by a birthing, an awakening, an opening, which is a shared awakening that is already happening on the planet. It's already happening like a wave, just that people aren't aware of how powerful already that is around the planet. You know, you see it in all of the demonstrations that are happening around the world, you know, even just for Palestine, for example. Although that's a political act, and still it's in the us and them and right and wrong, it's the beginning of awakening. It's the beginning of people not accepting what's being fed to them by the mass media and by the powers that be, that own the media, that own the financial systems, that own the political systems, that own basically everything on this planet. And that group of people is a very small group of people. They're at the center of this nefarious web. All the people who are supporting that aren't necessarily aware of what this central, if you want to call it cabal, are cooking up. They don't need to be. It's all on a need-to-know basis. Just as the person at the bank who gives you the money and does the teller doesn't necessarily know the machinations of what the whole bank is, because it's not there for them to know. So everybody's somehow acquiescing or somehow supporting this surreptitiously without even knowing, really. And it's time to wake up and question, what is this really going? Is this truly pro-human, everything that we're being fed? Is it truly pro-life? Is it truly embracing of the human family? Is it truly embracing of each individual's right to self-determination and wholeness? And if you ask these questions, I'm afraid that mostly it all comes up with no, 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 no. But people don't ask the question. So they just figure this is how it is. This is what life is like. I just have to accept it. And so on and so forth. But that's an asleep child. And what we're waking up into is a conscious custodian of planet Earth. And so this is the waking up period. What we're going through right now, if you want to look at it in ayahuasca parlance, is a great purge, a big throwing out of all that is not in congruence with the high frequency energies of what we're being birthed into. But that's the big picture. And when you can see that big picture, it allows you to at least accept and work with and walk through the valley of death as it plays out in front of you. But the thing is that if you don't see that, then it can be very disturbing and one would go into a lot of despair. So I would say to people who to wait and navigate through this is just to keep your frequency high. This is a war on human consciousness. You're talking about Gaza and other places. I mean, look, there's stuff going on in Sudan, Congo, equally as bad. Even in Azerbaijan, how do you say that name? But there's stuff going on. But of course, that's not the focal point. Even in Ukraine, although that's a lost cause now, they say, not worthy of the media anymore. Let's focus on Gaza because there's more horrific potential there to traumatize people and to polarize people than there is in these other wars. And who cares about Sudan? Just a bunch of black people. Who cares? So the powers that be are focusing upon Gaza because Jerusalem is to be the new head of state for the one world government. So, you know, like that's why they're focusing upon that. They are the puppet masters, and they control how people feel, think, and what they believe through the media and through so many agencies, other agencies. And so it behooves individuals to wake up, to see through the illusion, to expose the Watiko, the mind virus, the illusion of this so-called reality, wherever they see it. They don't have to fight it. If you fight the tar baby, guess what? You get stuck to the tar baby. You become the tar baby. It's about saying, look, this is what's really going on. Look what's going on. And just exposing it. And then in the exposing of it, it cannot hold any energy. It can only exist in the unconscious. You can only live in the projected shadow of one's own being. So it's like a narcissist who will never say, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm a good person, but they'll project it outwards onto someone else and make the partner or someone else feel very wrong. In fact, they can become destroyed from a narcissist projection, just as it can be by narcissist militaries on the planet today.
So as a brief summary, how are you feeling about the coming years?
Well, I'm an optimist, Dean. I always have been. And, I see that this is all a necessary prelude, a dark chapter in our evolutionary push. And I believe that it's necessary. Sadly, I wish we could do without it, but it is part of the process and always has been, which is exemplified and symbolized by our very birthing onto this planet. It's always involving the light and the dark and the struggle and the play, the magical interplay between yin and yang in any given moment. But the recognition that is awaiting us now is that yin and yang, being two polar opposites that can dance in infinite varieties and possibilities with each other, can never become one on the plane of duality. But they can be transformed or transcended or realized as one beyond this plane, what I call within fifth dimensional awareness, which is an essential recognition that all things are connected, that what you do to one part of the web affects every other part of the web, that the things are not isolated, that things are not separate, that things are not like in their own little domain. Things are connected, and we are that totality of that connection. Once you realize that gives you full impunity to play on the field of duality, but with the full awareness that I am the one, and that as the one, why would I ever want to hurt another part of the oneness? It couldn't even occur to you. You certainly don't need a rule book on that level of consciousness. You do need a rule book in 3D space-time, because there's this and that, up and down. You'll be convinced by one party or another that this is right or that's right or this is wrong or that's wrong. But ultimately, when you assume right of your own sovereignty and your own dominion, you will see that there's no rule books needed. It's just the awareness of all things are sacred. Everything is connected. I am simply a part of the whole, a sentient point of awareness, and yet I am the totality of it all, because the consciousness that animates me and runs through me and animates this mortal coil is the same consciousness that animates you, or this plant, or the tree, or the flower, or the moon, or the stars. It's the same essence. What the quantists would call non-local quantum reality. That's what it is. And everything is connected within that. So once you realize that, how could you ever want to hurt any other part of the totality? You want to live in harmony with, you want to cooperate with, and in giving back to the whole, you become aware that you give back to yourself. In other words, you're coming out of this consciousness, which I call service to self, which is what's dominating and strutting and fretting its hour upon the stage right now. And it will transform into awareness and service to the one and all. Service to the one and all. What the Buddhists have been saying all along. It's just like realizing that you are that. I am that. I'm not separate. And therefore, what I do to it, or the totality, I do to myself. And that's the sad unconsciousness that many of these people who are perpetrating these awful acts of violence and terror, as we speak, are fully unaware of. But the buck stops somewhere, and one day, somewhere along the line, they'll have to face the karma of everything that's being perpetrated in the name of God, or in the name of, sovereignty, of whatever the excuse is being given here for this conflagration. Ultimately, it's service to self. And this is what's dying on the planet. Although it's showing up in its full raging glory right now. And it seems to be where all the power is. But that also is an illusion. Once people stop and take stock of themselves and go, no, I do not consent, things very quickly will change. And I think we'll see that over the next few years. We'll see the 100th monkey principle come into play once we hit critical mass. And I think we're at critical mass. So it'll start to very rapidly extrapolate through the field of the unified field of consciousness. And I trust in that. So I have my hope in that, and not even hope. Hope is something in the future, it never comes. I trust in that. I trust that is the reality that we are capable of and willing enough to manifest into this present reality here now on this beautiful planet Earth.
Light of love, love of light,